Proud presents Color Crossroads, a conversation on Black mental health. Now, here's her host, Jonah Gilmore.
Good evening and welcome to tonight's episode of Color Crossroads. I'm your host, Jonah Gilmore. Each year in the month of February, we honor African Americans with Black History Month. It's a time to reflect and pay homage to the roles African Americans have played in the United States. We highlight noted pioneers such as Harriet Tubman, Sojourner Truth, Rosa Parks, and so many others who played a pivotal role in forming our history. For this episode of Color Crossroads, we want to take a different approach in telling our history and shed light on a topic that is not frequently discussed. Tonight's discussion will focus on mental health in the Black community and how the global pandemic has impacted it. So if you're just tuning in and missed the episode of Candid Conversation, here's a recap.
When we talk about implicit bias, what we have to understand is that it's really organized around this idea of racism. And the idea that racism has like these four different layers, right? There is institutional racism, which means that the institution was erected and started with racist ideas in mind.
The social determinants of health. I always talk about them like a tree, and you can think about each of those social determinants of health as a branch off of the tree. But what I say, what matters is where your tree is planted. So yes, if you're in a rural area, then your access to health care is very different than someone that's in an urban area. Right. Economics is very different.
The story of mental illnesses in African Americans cannot be told without mentioning the ongoing effects of racism, systematic oppression, and discrimination. So let's go back in history and discuss the many ideologies that were put in place to understand the Black mentality. According to the U.S. Census, the 1840 report included a question asking if you fall under the category of idiot or insane. Later in that year, experts realized workers overcounted the number of free Blacks who they identified as idiots or insane to show that Black Americans were unable to handle their freedom and needed to be held captive to control their mentality. In 1848, John Galt, a medical director for the Eastern Lunatic Asylum, believed that Blacks were immune to mental illness because they did not own any property, engage in commerce, or participate in any civic duties, such as voting and holding political offices. Galt strongly believed mental illness were only subjective to those who faced the daily stresses of economics, which were mainly wealthy white men. Now, moving on to the mid-1840s, Dr. Benjamin Rush, who was also a prominent medical professional in the 1800s, disagreed with Galt's ideology on Black immunity to mental health. Rush, whose signatures on the Declaration of Independence, came up with the idea that Blacks suffer from an affliction called negritude, something he believed to be a mild form of leprosy, and the only cure for it was to become white. Rush stressed that Black has the same natural intelligence as their white counterparts and that education and emancipation were needed to undo the damage done by slavery. It was in 1851 Dr. Samuel Cartwright, a prominent Louisiana physician, identified a new mental disorder for the behavior of slaves. He called it drapetomania, a disease that encouraged slaves to run away from their service. In his words, he believed that Negroes should be kept in a submissive state and treated like children, with care, whippings, and attention to prevent them from running away. During the pre-Civil War era, many mental health facilities barred the enslaved from any treatment. Many mental health professionals during this era believed that housing Blacks in the same facility as the white patients would affect the healing of the whites. That idea forced Blacks to be housed and cared for outside near the mental health institutions or in local jails, which were operated without government funding. They referred to children as inmates and often misdiagnosed and wrongly accused of crimes, exposing them to additional mistreatment by authorities. Let's talk about the systematic barriers. Although Black people make up roughly 13% of the United States population, they are overrepresented in high-risk groups. For example, the Black community comprises approximately 40% of the homeless population, 50% in the prison system, and 45% of Black children are in foster care. According to an article from the Columbia Psychiatric Organization, research shows that these barriers contribute to the development of mental illnesses. It creates generational trauma to the individual and lingers without any proper diagnosing, which further explains the mistrust in medical professionals. In the Black community, there's a negative stigma surrounding mental health. Instead of seeking professional help for conditions such as depression, anxiety, many resort to self-medication, which often results in substance abuse or isolation. Some may contribute the lack of seeking care to the mistrust Black people have with medical professionals who don't look like them. We're joined now by Dr. Russell Ledet. Dr. Ledet, thank you for being here with us today.
Thank you for having me, Mr. Gilmore. It's definitely appreciated.
Thank you. We want to dive right in. You're a medical doctor. You're a Black man. What is the biggest misconception when it comes to trusting non-Black medical professionals from what you have seen?
Yeah, that they don't care about you. I think anyone who has gotten this far in their medical education cares about the patient. The first thing that we're taught is the importance of worrying about and being concerned for the welfare of a patient. I do understand the hesitancy, especially in the Black community around non-Black providers not caring about the Black patient, mainly because there has been some trauma, that's been experienced by Black people in the medical care system. And those things cannot be, ignored. But at the same time, I think we have to have this careful balance of taking into account some very, worrisome experiences, but at the same time understanding that the bigger goal of medicine in general is to take care of every patient the best way possible. So we need to address these needs and these structural racism issues that we have, but at the same time need to understand that the treatment for whatever illness a patient may have lies within the walls of the hospital.
And you say understanding the needs. You think about this mistrust, but when you put it into perspective, who's really impacted by this? Is it the Black patient or is it the medical professional?
Yeah, I think at the end of the day, who's really impacted by it is both parties, right? But mostly the actual person who needs that care. And the reason why I say that is because, we have a certain level of knowledge that's necessary in order to treat a lot of illnesses. You can't just, go out and acquire this knowledge just because you feel like it. It takes years and years and years of gaining this knowledge and then being able to put it into practice. And I think the issue that we have now is that while I said I understand the mistrust, the real issue lies in is what do you have to gain by ignoring the advice of a clinician? What do you have to gain by not sitting down and listening to them? I don't think you need to sit there and be mistreated. But I also don't think that the majority of the medical community is sitting here intentionally mistreating patients. I think we need to understand that there needs to be a careful balance of both of those, of addressing the needs, but also understanding that structural racism is something that we are currently working on and we need to continue to fight against.
And you briefly touched on it just there, but how do we bridge that gap? Can we trust medical professionals who don't look like us?
Yeah, I think we can. I will be honest to tell you that as someone who is in his medical training now, I think there are strides being made right now by many institutions to make sure that cultural sensitivity, cultural intelligence, and cultural knowledge is a component of our medical training. And what that means is that when you walk into, the room where a patient is, you take into account a lot of nuances that maybe in the past we didn't take into account. Like, where they're from, what are the cultures or what are the cultural identities that they take into account in their lifestyle, and not just discarding those as not being important for the care of the patient. Also understanding where they live, what they have access to. Do they live close to a food desert? Do they not live close to a food desert? Do they have access to a pharmacy? Do they have access to bus care? Those kinds of things are now being taken into account when a clinician is talking to a patient. And those kinds of things can actually further our ability to provide holistic care for a patient as opposed to only thinking about their medical illness.
Well, thank you so much, Dr. Ledet. We want to take a quick break, but we want you to stick around. Coming up, we'll talk about the COVID-19 vaccine, something many Black people are hesitant of taking. We'll be right back.
Color Crossroads, a conversation on Black mental health will continue in just a moment.
This Black History Month, we want to highlight Black people who have impacted the medical professional. There are many African Americans who have broke barriers with their talents and made history. Meet Dr. Daniel Hale Williams. He was a surgeon-in-chief who performed the first successful open heart surgery in 1893.
Welcome back to Color Crossroads, a conversation on Black mental health.
Now, let's talk about dealing with mental health as it relates to the ongoing coronavirus pandemic. Life as what we know it has changed dramatically, from wearing face masks in public, incorporating social distancing into our daily habits, and dealing with the stresses of job loss, deaths of loved ones, and dealing with the everyday hope of wanting things to go back to normal. The economic downturn and staggering job losses due to the global pandemic has resulted in loss of health insurance, financial stability, housing, food, and the safety net of saving and resources. The ongoing pandemic has shifted the way we live our day-to-day lives and taken a toll on our overall mental health, especially those who are at the forefront of their professions, like preachers, doctors, and even professors. I talked with Dr. Leonard Moore, professor at the University of Texas at Austin, and he explained how his family is trying to find their new norm in the times of COVID-19. Dr. Leonard Moore and his wife met in their teen years. Church events brought the couple together, but it was transparency and love that would bond them.
We started talking at the convention, and we had a long conversation, and I just happened to tell him all about my life, all the drama, all the things I had been through, all the things I had overcome. And so I told him that as like a friend, you know, not as thinking that we were going to hook up or date ever. And I probably told him more than I would tell somebody who I dated, but it actually ended up being a good thing, because when we did start dating, he kind of knew what he was getting into. He knew some of my background issues and the baggage that I brought to the relationship.
The couple has been married for 20 years and has 3 kids. When it comes to the Black family, they say the saying is true: representation matters.
We raised them up on a lot of Black history, you know what I mean? Had them watching Roots, had them watching Emmett Till videos, even at a young age. And so for us, man, it's very, very important that they know who they are.
In the Black community, mental health is an issue, one that seems to be taboo, and now, in the middle of a pandemic, it's at the forefront of conversations.
The fact that I spend every waking hour, though, with my family, with my husband and my children, that's been an adjustment. But I would say it's worked out to be good. Like, a lot of families, it doesn't work out for their good. You know, a lot of families they said the divorce rate right now is at an all-time high because you're spending so much more time with your spouse. But it's helped us to grow and to realize that, you know, this is who we have, you know. I would say as far as my children, I do have one daughter who I feel like it's affected her mentally in a not so good of a way. And of course that weighs on us as parents, because you're trying to figure out what the best route of it is. Do we just pray for her like Black people do, or do we get her counseling? Do we put her on medication, you know? And I'm torn with that, because growing up, maybe my parents should have done more for me as far as helping me get counseling and things like that. But because they didn't, all my mother did was stay on her knees and pray for me. That's my go-to. But I know that we have other things available to help us with that. And so just trying to apply those things and help get her the help that she needs has been challenging for me.
The pandemic has also shifted how we interact with people, how educational classes are conducted, and gave us a new norm, forcing us to be diverse.
It's okay if you don't get anything done during this period. You know, you read these articles like, you know, you need the pandemic, you got a lot of time, you can get a lot done, you got to come out of this pandemic better than you went in it. But some people just can't function. And that's okay. You know, it is okay to be unproductive during this period of time. I would say that's number one. And number two, me and my wife were talking about this yesterday. However you cope, now we're talking about healthy coping mechanisms, but however you cope, like my daughter, she likes going out to eat with her friends. She's a social butterfly. She's not at school. She plays volleyball, but you know, her girl's not really on the team. She's one of the only Black girls. So for her way of coping, and we've talked about this, you know, she likes to go to Starbucks every day, and then 3 or 4 days a week, go get a meal with her friends. And it hit me that I had to be okay with that, because that's how, you know what I mean? That is how she's coping, and that's how she recreates her community when she can't be at school.
Normalizing the discussion of mental health in the Black community can potentially stop the generational neglect of seeking help and aiding of mental illness. If you know anyone struggling with mental health or in need of self-reflection, Here are some online resources you can utilize for yourself or refer to a friend. The Black Emotional and Mental Health, also known as BEAM, is a training and grant-making organization dedicated to the healing, wellness, and liberation of Black communities. It provides educational resources on emotional awareness, personal reflection activities such as journal prompts, and various articles on Black mental health. You can find more information on BEAM at www.beam.community. Next, we have the Boris Lawrence Foundation. This foundation provides a changing perception on mental illness in the African American community by encouraging people to seek help if need, strive to build the trust between Black people and mental health fields. It provides an online community that provides a directory of mental health programs and provides that serve the Black community. Series of digital content that includes a suggested book, reading lists, worksheets, and interactive modules. For more information about the foundation, visit their website, www.borislhensonfoundation.org. And of course, you can find all of those resources on our website as well at beartproud.com. There are many African Americans who have broke barriers and their talents made history. Meet Dr. Ben Carson, who recently served in the Trump administration. He is known for his 1987 surgery where he successfully separated Siamese twins joined at the cranium.
Color Crossroads, a conversation on Black mental health will continue in just a moment.
There are many African Americans who have broke barriers with their talents and made history. Meet Mary Eliza Mahoney, the first African American licensed nurse in the U.S.
Welcome back to Color Crossroads, a conversation on Black mental health.
Welcome back to Color Crossroads. Historical experiments such as the Tuskegee experiment also plays a part in the defiance in wanting to seek treatment. As it relates to the global pandemic we are currently facing, many African Americans are hesitant to get tested and receive the vaccine. We're back with Dr. Russell Ledet. Now, Dr. Ledet, you know, we had that experiment and you hear about a lot of Black people are hesitant of taking this vaccine. Why do you think that is? Do the two relate?
I think in a larger context, yes, they do. I think specifically when you think about the mistrust that was fostered from the Tuskegee experiment and how long that has stuck around, what we're really talking about is this idea that the government or these overarching bodies that control medicine and hospitals don't genuinely care about Black people to the point of allowing them to die from something that was easily treatable, right? Like we had penicillin for syphilis, yet we wanted to see what happens to people who have syphilis and aren't treated with penicillin. That's a terrible experiment to have. And I think history has told us that that probably was a terrible thing to do. And I understand why that mistrust has been fostered up until this point, but we're at a very different position in the case of the COVID-19 vaccine and our accessibility to it. Right. In this case, we do have accessibility to a vaccine, and the disease of COVID-19 has disproportionately affected our community in ways that we probably never could imagine in our lifetime. And so this opportunity for us to actually improve our outcomes is literally on our front step. There's a part for sure that medical professionals need to play, right, in terms of helping people to understand how this vaccine works, what we know about this vaccine, what the side effects of this vaccine are, how this plays a role in women who are pregnant, how this plays a role in children or older adults. But there's also this other component where we're gonna need for people to make a decision for the betterment of their health because they have access to something that can make them better. I kind of equated it to a patient comes in with high glucose, a high blood glucose level, and you tell them, hey, the best thing that we can do for you right now is put you on maybe metformin or maybe even start you on, some insulin. And then you go home, and even though you have access to insulin, you have access to metformin or maybe even gobiride, you choose not to take it. We need to do a better job of helping people to understand what the impact of making those decisions mean. It's not just the person who's sick. It's their family who's going to suffer from it too. Their community who needs them, their, maybe even if they own a business, the people who, patron their business, like all those things play a role. It's not just the patient. So we need to take into account the holistic view of what's going on.
Now, one of the things we've been hearing about, you think about geographically where the vaccine is being distributed. It's predominantly in white neighborhoods, and black people feel, okay, if you're going to give me this vaccine, why do I have to go to a predominantly white neighborhood? Why can't I have it in my neighborhood? Do you think that adds to that, that hesitation of I don't want to get it because it's not really given to me in my community?
Look, Jonah, from my perspective, I think what they're saying is 100% true. I think there needs to be some courting going on in which you understand that these people are already hesitant, right? Like my people are already hesitant. And so you don't need to give them any more reason to be hesitant. Not only that, there needs to be this open line of communication in which all of their questions are answered and all of their worries are addressed and they are convenienced. Because why would it make sense for you to put something in a community that's not disproportionately affected by a disease that you're trying to deal with? That just doesn't make sense. You're going to tell me that I'm already at a disadvantage economically, I'm already at a disadvantage socially, and then you're going to tell me I need to extend myself even more for something that literally is disproportionately affecting my community. Come on, we got to do better. And this is what I'm talking about, where it's time for the medical community to do their work, to do their part. Somebody's got to be smart enough to understand that if you want to foster trust, you're going to need to court people. You're going to need to understand what their concerns are, address them, and help them to be at a place where they are comfortable with what's going on. But they also are knowledgeable about what's going on. And you're not just convincing them to just do it. This is not Nike. We need more communication. That needs to happen. And that starts with us.
You said starting with us, and you talk about medical professionals doing their part. You are doing something amazing with the 15 White Coats. Tell us about that initiative.
Yeah, so the 15 White Coats, an organization that for sure Louisiana knows very well, was started by 15 Black medical students who stood in front of a slave court at the Whitney Plantation and took a photo that ended up going viral. We started this company, and the whole idea behind the company was, Jonah, the first one is that we wanted kids to imagine becoming doctors and looking just like us. But we also wanted the kids who don't look like us to have an image in their head of what a doctor could look like that didn't look like them. It needed to go in both directions. And the other part is that we needed to help minorities to get into medical school. A lot of people don't know how much it costs to apply to medical school. I'm not talking about pay for medical school. I'm talking about just to apply. Sometimes it can cost upwards of $5,000 to $10,000. And so what we've been doing is raising money with the sole purpose of helping people from minority communities to apply to medical school, get into medical school, and then thrive in medical school to become the physicians that our communities and other communities need.
And that's something we all need. We want to thank you so much, Dr. Ledet, for joining us. And you can keep up with Dr. Ledet on social media. That info is on your screen. And also check out the 15whitecoats.org to learn more about their mission. Stay tuned. We'll be right back.
Thank you.
Color Crossroads, a conversation on Black mental health, will continue in just a moment.
For our last moment of history tonight, we want to honor Dr. Mae Jemison. She was the first Black female astronaut to research various vaccines in conjunction with the Center for Disease Control. She continued her medical research on the shuttle Endeavour by conducting experiments in materials processing and life science in space.
Welcome back to Color Crossroads, a conversation on Black mental health.
Thank you all for watching tonight's episode of Color Crossroads. We hope you all learned and enjoyed all of the elements of this show. Please continue to engage in the conversation regarding Black mental health so we can continue to strive on the path to healing and sustaining for the future for generations to come. To all of our frontline workers and first responders, we appreciate you and thank you for your service. From me, my colleague Dion Guillory, our producers, and all of us here at BR Proud News, thank you for tuning in and have a great night.